Welcome, friends and comrades. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Sonali, Momentum National Secretary and London Regional Rep on the National Coordinating Group. It's amazing. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Sonali, Momentum National Secretary and London Regional Rep on the National Coordinating Group. It's amazing for joining us this evening. I'm Sonali, Momentum National Secretary and London Regional Rep on the National Coordinating Group. It's amazing for joining us this evening. I'm Sonali, Momentum National Secretary and London Regional Rep on the National Coordinating Group. I'm so sorry about that. Sorry, I had a bit of a moment. Welcome, friends and comrades. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Sonali, Momentum National Secretary for Momentum and London Regional Rep for the NCG. It's amazing to see, I think, over 1,700 of you on the call already tonight. I think this just shows how strong the opposition is to this undemocratic suspension. Tonight, we're going to hear from figures across the Labour left, from MPs to trade unionists and young Labour activists. All of us are united in a profound opposition to anti-Semitism. We agree that in the past, the party has failed to deal with complaints properly and welcome the opportunity to unite our movement in an effort to make long-lasting improvements to the internal culture of Labour. But as you all know, this task has been made so much more difficult by yesterday's decision. The suspension of Jeremy Corbyn has profoundly divided our party and made an open and honest discussion about the way forward almost impossible. We should be clear, this suspension will do nothing to advance the process of reform within the party. As socialists, we have an understanding of how central racism is to the system we want to overturn. From the scapegoating of migrants to provide cover for grabs on workers' rights, to the use of anti-Semitic tropes to blindside analysis of capitalist power structures in favour of ill-conceived conspiracy theories. Defeating racism and anti-Semitism is integral to our work of building a society that works for the many, not the few. This is an existential issue for our movement and should never be reduced to an internal factional one. Over the last few years, there have been many attacks on Jeremy, as we all know, but they were never just attacks on him as a person. They attacked him because he was the head of a movement that threatened the status quo. We must always remember that, and we can't be cowed. The road ahead of us is a difficult one, but Momentum has a plan to step up to the challenges that we face. Together, we will build a movement that can fight to replace the politics of do-nothing centrism with transformative socialism and shape the future of our party. That movement will have to be built across every part of society, from the workplace to our neighbourhoods and the party itself. We must fight for dignity, justice and equality at every opportunity until we have become the kind of organised force that can transform society from the bottom up. Momentum is the biggest socialist membership organisation the UK has ever seen. We're not starting from zero, but we need to build on this legacy and go further. From building powerful local organisation through our growing campaign against evictions, to electing the United Left grassroots voice candidates to the NEC, we have a lot to be getting on with. And we cannot turn away from this fight. From the COVID crisis to climate collapse, the need for profound systemic change is staring us in the face. We are the pragmatists, because we understand that everything has to change. If you're up for taking part in that fight, I'd urge you to join Momentum today. We can only do this if we work together. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, John Trickett, MP for Hemsworth, a formidable voice in Parliament, and we're also very lucky to have him on Momentum's NCG.
Thank you very much, Sonali, and what a great introduction you've just given us to this very important rally this evening. Welcome to everybody. Congratulations to Momentum for organising this rally. I'm proud to be part of the Momentum NCG, and hope to play a full role in the months to come. Look, I think was the first MP to nominate Jeremy Corbyn publicly. And I stayed at his side right through the whole of his period in office as leader, through the coup, through the attempts to remove him, through the general elections, the two general elections, and all of the events, the turbulent events that we all lived through. Did we make mistakes? Of course we made mistakes. It's part of the human condition. The thing is to try to learn from them, to put things right in the future. I echo what Sonali just said about the way in which anti-Semitism has been dealt with. Because anti-Semitism is a poison. It's a growing poison, as is racism, xenophobia, and other kinds of hatred of different groups in our society. Anti-Semitism is maybe the worst of them because of the crimes which we saw in the 20th century. And we have to fight it. The question is the left a part of the problem or a part of the solution? Well, I think it's clear. We are a part of the solution, because whenever you look at any struggle against anti-Semitism or fascism anywhere, there is the left standing firm. We are there fighting that fight inside the movement and in the wider society, and rightly so, because we've got a vision of a different kind of society entirely. Recently, somebody sent me to link together two stories which are running. One is anti-Semitism and anti-fascism, and the other one is the spy cops legislation, which I was sorry to have to rebel against, but I could not sit on my hands, and that was going through. The other day, I received a photo which had been taken by secret police of a demonstration against the National Front back in the 1970s in Leeds. There I was with my wife and two kids marching along. There's been a long fight, and it continues to be part of the left's central identity. It is a poison, but the left will always take a stand. We will always be there, inside or outside the party. And let me just say this about anti-Semitism too. I'm incredibly proud of my identity. My mother and all her family, my ancestors were Jewish. Recently, 2 or 3 years ago, I was attacked in the streets, not by the left, but by a fascist who said he was going to fill the streets with patriots and wipe away people like me. That's the true face of anti-Semitism in our country. And I went away, I was deeply shocked and thought about it. And eventually I went to the police. They confirmed it was a hate crime. I was the victim as the local member of parliament. We went to court, and the guy actually pleaded guilty to what he had done. So I have reason to be very, very strong about this, as the whole of the left is. And I have seen and encountered and been the subject to anti-Semitic attacks within the Labour Party too. So let's make no doubt about it. This is a problem. It's a rising problem in society, but we will tackle it, and the left will do that. Now, I just want to widen the argument briefly as I bring my comments to a conclusion. Just first of all, to say about Jeremy, I was speaking to him yesterday. He told me, I think, that he joined the party in 1966. I joined in 1969. So he's done 54 years. And in that time, whenever there was people in difficulty, he had their back. Now we need to have his back. And I'm convinced we can get him reinstated. We can get him reinstated, not simply because of our strength of numbers, because of the strength of our argument. What was done to Jeremy yesterday was unfair and unjust. And I believe we can get him back into our party so he can do his next 54 years, as he's already, I think, planning to do on behalf of every one of us fighting for justice in a better society. But I just want to widen the argument, as I said, because if there are people in our movement or beyond who want to somehow delegitimize the left, somehow say we're not a legitimate part of the movement for one reason or another, let me say that is not something that we will ever accept. We will make a stand on that too, because there is a red thread which runs throughout the history of the Labour movement, which is the red thread of democratic socialism, which says about our society needs to be transformed fundamentally. Sometimes that third thread, and I've seen it in my lifetime, was very, very thin, stretched almost to breaking point. And sometimes it was a rich red tapestry, wide and majoritarian, but it was there through every single step. And people didn't walk away, as some are now saying we need to do in the Labour Party. Democratic Socialists didn't walk away. I represent a mining community, a former mining community. Let me say, the miners stayed out for a year with no income. It was hard to feed the children. Did they walk away in my constituency? No, they remained solid. Did the people at Peterloo walk away when they were faced with troops? No, they didn't. If you think about the whole of our history, that red thread has been there. We made our stand. And it's important that we continue to make our stand today and not walk away. Because I've had 5 people, I think, in my constituency Labour Party throwing their hand yesterday. I'm going to speak to each one of them and say, this is not the way to walk. Skulking away, hiding in the shadows, as if somehow democratic socialism was not a legitimate part of our movement. Of course it's legitimate, right from the beginning. Left-wingers, radicals, anti-capitalists were there. And we will stay, we will make our stand, we will fight. And so let me finish with this 3 things. There'll be no skulking away by the left. We're not going to somehow hang our heads in shame. We're proud of who we are. We'll defend our flag. There will be no retreats from our policies, and there will be no surrender by the left. Comrades, we've got an argument to make, a battle to win for Jeremy. And in this week of the school holidays, when there are starving children not being fed by the blowing Tories, I think we've got better things to do, and I hope the leadership is listening, than turn into an internal fight. We need to take on the Tories and transform our capitalist society, which is so unjust and unfair, into a better world, the one that we dream of and which is almost at hand. Thank you very much for listening.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you so much, John. That was really inspiring. I'm going to hand over to another fantastic speaker now. We've got Chardine Taylor-Stone, who's the Vice Chair of the Musicians Union Equalities Committee. She's a sharp-thinking and sharp-talking anti-racist activist. We're really lucky to have her here today. Thanks, Chardine.
Thank you, Sonali, and hello, comrades. Thank you for coming today. It's a really important event. And I just want to start off by saying that, you know, something that should have been about addressing anti-racism has actually become a political tool to attack the left. And this is on purpose. It's been made on purpose to stem the change of a new generation of people that are coming through who are anti-racist, anti-transphobia, anti-imperialism. And this has been done on purpose to destroy our movement. I want that to be very clear to people. This is a political weapon against the left and nothing else. And I want to talk about Jeremy Corbyn's legacy. 37 years of anti-racist activism in the Labour Party, when the Labour Party was busy curtailing to racist rhetoric, imperialist rhetoric throughout all that time, and Corbyn stood against that. And now that party is punishing him for facing up to that legacy. And instead, we have a legacy of Thatcherism, of imperialist wars, and running over delivery drivers in our SUVs. This is what the Labour Party stands for, and this is why Jeremy Corbyn is being punished for standing against that. So I don't have anything much else to say, other than I believe that us and our communities really need to work together. It's important for us across the spectrum of Black, Jewish, Asian, white, that we stand together, because this move has been made to divide us and turn against each other. So I ask us on social media, in our CLPs, that we start building up solidarity again, start working towards getting Jeremy back and reinstated as an MP. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chardine. I'm amazed to see there's 4,000 of you on the call right now. So thank you so much for joining us. Next, we're going to be handing over to Howard Beckett, Unite's Assistant General Secretary. Howard, good evening.
Sonali, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for everything that Momentum does, and thank you for everybody for joining tonight. Sonali, I've been asked to talk about the importance of building the workplace at a time of crisis. I think all of us have been given different subjects tonight. I'm happy to do so, obviously, but I will be addressing the issue of Jeremy Corbyn and his suspension also. But I'm happy to do so in particular because at this moment in time, well, we were all desperate for the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn. As someone who is an official in a trade union movement, Jeremy gave hope to so many workers at a time when they desperately needed it. It's only in the recent past that we can remember Labour leaders in Parliament who were frightened of addressing the issue of a strike, workers having to withdraw their labour in desperate need for extra wages, and Labour front bench embarrassed about that. A Labour front bench at a time in respect of Jeremy's first election who voted disgracefully in respect of the welfare bill. And here was a man who stepped forward with genuine politics, a man who was determined to be on the side of workers and understood the importance of collectivism, a man who always put himself forward to go on the picket lines. And now, sadly, if I look at the politicians of Westminster, I see exactly that. I see Westminster politics. I see people who are obsessed with an establishment politics. I see leaders, including at the Labour Party, who make speeches that are about patriotism, about genuflecting to the establishment, when the workers of this country desperately need hope and desperately need a vision. And it's why the activities of Unite, and it's why the activities of Momentum and other left organisations have never been more important in society. We desperately need now to look to our champions of industry and our champions of communities and have them have the confidence to step forward to represent people. And that's what Unite's political agenda is all about. It's what our political schools are all about. Stretching into communities and stretching into industrial workplaces to get people to understand that the politics of society dictates what you can expect to receive from your employer in a workplace. That the reality is an employer will tell workers that they must suck up inflation and pay for it themselves because of the society that we live in. That employers will tell workers that a 0-hour contract is all that you can get because of the society we live in. That they will impose layoff clauses on workers, disgracefully use fire and rehire tactics at a time of crisis, all because of the society that we live in. A society that does not understand the importance of class collectivism, does not understand the importance of organisation, and people who have lost faith in their own abilities to change their own lives. And we have to do that for them. The example that Marcus Rashford has set in being a voice for young children who would be left starving if it was up to the lead politicians of society is an extraordinary example for all of us, but shows us what we can achieve. We shouldn't accept food banks any more than we should accept 0-hour contracts and precarious employment. And I'm happy particularly to talk about this at a time of COVID, which has shone a light on the inequalities of this country. Inequalities that if Jeremy was our leader, he would be out there up front and talking as a champion on behalf of us all. The simple reality that if you're poor or if you're a worker or if you're disabled or if you're vulnerable or you're elderly, you're not just more likely to be forced into work and forced to keep the country going, but you're also more likely to die. Extraordinary that the minorities, communities of this country are forced into work and as a consequence more likely to contract COVID and more likely to die, and the establishment sits back and watches that. We are watching wealth move to the few. We are seeing workers told in the likes of Sainsbury's and Tesco's and Amazon that their work is essential to feed the nation, keep the nation going, while the reality is that those who own the likes of Amazon are taking billions, tens of billions of pounds in additional wealth to the tens of billions that they already had. And it's why we desperately need now leadership. And it's why the trade union movement and our left membership activities are so important. It's why the members of Labour are far more important than the leadership of Labour. The leadership of Labour is merely a custodian of that title. And on many occasions in our movement's history, that leadership has failed. But the bedrock, the trade union movement and the membership have continued to believe in the journey of change. They've continued to believe as long, but ultimately it leads towards justice. And we must believe in that now. And in the absence of leadership, we must now step forward with the alternative agenda. We must say clearly that we have to see wealth tax talked about on behalf of our people, that we have to see borrowing, that we have to talk in the language of 1946 when people returned from the Second World War with debt twice as high now as a percentage to GDP. But they had the bravery to build the social state, build 1 million council houses, and importantly to say our generation of working class children will have the right to go to university. That is the language that we now expect and what we must demand of our Labour Party, that we talk of a new deal for workers. And we can start by saying right here and now that stick your clap on a Thursday for NHS and frontline workers. We demand 15% rise in our wages, or yes, we will withdraw our labour, because that is the reality of the strength of collectivism in this country, that we do not genuflect to the establishment. We say very clearly that we demand and deserve more, and if we do not get it, expect the repercussions. And that is vital for us to be able to say at this time. We must not make the mistake of 2008, when after the financial crash, we did not even get so much as a Robin Hood tax. And we must not make the same mistake as at the first wave, whenever we dimly went back to our workplaces, expecting it all to be over and accepted the status quo of society. We must now own the narrative and demand more. But it would be remiss of me, Sonali, not to deal with the issue of Jeremy Corbyn's suspension. Jeremy Corbyn, a man who has fought racism all his life and has been vilified by the media for the last 4 years and now suspended by his own party. And let me say clearly, in respect of my interpretation of the EHRC report, I interpret that they foresaw the need for us to debate the scale of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party in order for us to debate how we go about ridding ourselves of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. I think they foresaw the reality that a man who is unjustly labelled by the media and given ownership of every act of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party would want to talk of the improvements that he made under his leadership to try and tackle the problem of anti-Semitism. And importantly, I think that the HRC foresaw that we would want to talk about the role of the right-wing media, who were desperate to label Labour as institutionalised racist. And they failed. And that's what Jeremy Corbyn has sought to do, and that's why we must step forward and defend Jeremy Corbyn and say very clearly that he has been unjustly suspended and must immediately be reinstated. But Sonali, I do not see this in isolation. I do not see the attack on Jeremy in isolation. I do not see it in isolation from the leaving of the Labour Party of Jenny Formby. I don't see it in isolation from the gerrymandering of the voting system for the NEC elections. I do not see it in isolation from the dismissal of Becky Long-Bailey. I do not see it in isolation from the abject failure to embrace the Black Lives Matter movement. And I most definitely do not see it in isolation from the abstentions of the covert human intelligence surveillance bill. A bill intended to permit the state to infiltrate our trade union movement and activist groupings. A bill that will see the activities of spy cops, blacklisting, organise permitted. A bill that will permit state crimes of murder, torture, rape, if done in the interests of the state. So, Sonali, I will finish by saying this directly to Keir Starmer in his own words. If you cannot see that that piece of legislation must be opposed, then, frankly, you are part of the problem. Solidarity.
Great, so thank you so much, Howard. Now we are handing over to our next speaker, the one and only John McDonnell, the People's Chancellor and MP for Hayes and Harlington. Thanks so much for joining us today, John.
Thanks, Sonali. And I'm grateful for all that has been said up until now, and I'm grateful for Howard's inspiring speech. I'm going to read much of what I've said because we have to be careful in our language at the moment. We don't want to give any hostages to fortune to those that might wish to use our words and distort them and use them against the left. So let me make it clear, I'm here in solidarity with my long-standing comrade, Jeremy Corbyn. What happened to him yesterday, his suspension, was profoundly wrong. That's the bottom line. It was profoundly wrong, and it must be reversed. That's the message from this meeting and meetings that are going on all over our country and our party. Keir Starmer said today he doesn't want a civil war in the party. I made a statement also saying nobody does. But we're stumbling into one hell of a row over what? The use of language, misinterpretation, and overreaction. I said when I stood down as Shadow Chancellor, maybe a bit of a joke, I said, look, I want to be an elder statesman. Well, here we go. My advice is that with a bit of explanation over what was meant in various statements, we could all save ourselves a lot of grief. So let's start with what we all agree upon. We all oppose anti-Semitism wherever it is in society. As members of the Labour Party, we have a special responsibility as an anti-racist party, a movement, to root it out in our community. It's been part of our historic mission. Whenever and wherever its ugly head is reared. And that's been our role over generations, this party's, this movement's. But that does start with ensuring that our own party, our own movement, does not harbour or provide a platform for anti-Semites. And let's be clear, to our deep regret, we have to acknowledge that anti-Semitism has over time penetrated our party. It didn't start in 2015. I remember those examples of anti-Semitism in our party back when the anti-Semitic posters were designed and trialled against Michael Howard, the Jewish leader of the Conservative Party, under Tony Blair. But you know, the left does have a special responsibility for the period since 2015 because we were in the leadership. And let's go back when evidence emerged initially of anti-Semitism. The initial examples that were put to us actually were from Ed Miliband's period. But then there was mounting evidence of anti-Semitism under our leadership. We have to acknowledge that. It was social media in particular. That's why Jeremy commissioned, quite rightfully, Shami Chakrabarti to do her report. And the frustration was that it was not implemented thoroughly and effectively. And we've expressed that frustration time and time again. And our criticism, some of you may recall, and I've said it time and time again, Jeremy has echoed it, is that it wasn't implemented fast enough. And to be frank, it wasn't ruthless enough. So yes, we acknowledge then there was a debt of apology to the Jewish community. And Jeremy and I, both of us, and many others, apologize. And I apologize again. We should have been faster and we should have been more ruthless. There's a range of reasons why, and they need proper examination and scrutiny. Of course they do. But nevertheless, it was under our period of leadership. So numerically, we know that the instances of anti-Semitism may have been small, but these things aren't measured by numbers, but by the seriousness of the issue, by the effect that they can have. And the evidence showed that some people, yes, may have overestimated the numbers of party members involved, but that isn't the issue. The stain of anti-Semitism is not measured by numbers, but by the appalling offensive nature and existence of it. And as Jeremy said time and time again, one anti-Semite in our party is too many and should have been, and we tried to root out. So it is true as well that our political opponents have attacked us over the issue of anti-Semitism. Time and time again, the Tories raised this in Parliament, but without once criticising the racist and anti-Semitic behaviour of Boris Johnson, their own leader. And you know, I even had anti-Semitism raised in Treasury questions by the Tories. So this does not mean that the evidence of anti-Semitism in our party didn't exist, or was trumped up, or it doesn't excuse not acknowledging its existence and tackling it. But the acknowledgement made by us all, including Jeremy, of the horrendous nature of anti-Semitism and its existence in our party and our society is something that actually should bring us together, not divide us. And it should bring us together to ensure that we wage the fight against this evil. That's what I want, and that's what Jeremy wants. My appeal is not the launch of some civil war or for members to leave the party or to set up another party. My appeal is for unity, clarification that we are all on the same page when it comes to wanting to tackle anti-Semitism. And the way that we do that is all of us. We stay in the party. This is our Labour Party. Secondly, we have lifted the suspension of Jeremy Corbyn. Thirdly, let's agree across the whole party to launch a programme of anti-racist campaigning and tackling anti-Semitism wherever it rears its head, alongside, yes, anti-racist organisations like Black Lives Matter and alongside Jewish community organisations and all those campaigners against anti-Semitism that actually most of us have supported and worked with over the years. And let's become what we should be and what we were. You know, over the years, we built our party as an anti-racist, the largest anti-racist party and movement in this country. That's what we need to become. That's what we need to strive for now. Not splits, not civil war, but a united party tackling anti-Semitism wherever it rears its ugly head. That's what I'd like to say this evening. I'm hoping that all members of the party listen to that appeal. I'm hoping the Labour leadership listens to that appeal. And I'm hoping that we can find a way through this to ensure that we have unity against racism within our society. Solidarity, comrades.
Thank you so much, John. It's great to hear from you. Thanks for joining us this evening. So next up, we're going to hear from a fantastic writer and historian, Barnaby Raine. You might have seen him on Newsnight yesterday. It was fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us, Barnaby.
Hello, can you all hear me? It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, and it's wonderful to share this platform with so many fantastic socialists. There is a world you can find every morning in newspaper columns and every night on TV news bulletins. It's a world of precarious stability where your job and your home and your security are threatened by radicals with funny hair and funny clothes and foreign food. It's a frightened and a frightening world. And for 5 years or more now, racism has been added to the list of threats from these dreaded radicals. The left, it said, are a bunch of anti-Semites. We've had endless news bulletins where wise and respectable figures shake their heads in horror and say this racist Corbynite cancer must be purged, while some on the left have insisted in response that there isn't much racism at all. It is time, I think, to end this absurdity. Britain is the land that housed its black and brown workers in the top floors of a London tower block, so that when that block burned down, the faces of the dead were dark. That building, that bonfire, was named after Francis Grenfell, a colonial commander who massacred people in Ireland and Africa, and now the descendants of his victims will be remembered forever under his surname. That is Britain, the land whose government threatens to send in the full might of the Navy against desperate people in the Channel, boarding makeshift dinghies in search of safety. That is Britain, whose Muslim communities are surveilled to test their compliance with British values. And if you think, oh, well, yes, but anti-Semitism is different, our political masters are enlightened and tolerant of Jews, then you should know that our Prime Minister wrote a novel replete with anti-Semitic caricatures of hook-nosed, greedy businessmen. You should know that Prince Charles, the heir to the throne, Britain's richest welfare scrounger, once complained that America is ruled by a Jewish lobby. You should know that Alistair Campbell once designed a national election campaign depicting his Jewish opponents as Shylock and Fagin and flying pigs. To think that racism is alien to these shores is to know nothing of Britain. And to say that, as we've heard recently, that the Labour Party has always been an anti-racist party is to insult every asylum-seeking child pushed into destitution by the calculated decisions of the Blair government to appease the right-wing press and prove they could be tough on the poor and the foreign. My first political activity as a child was volunteering at a drop-in centre run by my synagogue for refugees made homeless by a British Labour government. Corbyn supporters on the left are not immune from bigotry either. I have spent a few years now as a British Jew saying that. The years since the financial crash have seen a rise in anti-Semitism. That is the awful and the dangerous truth of a world of insecurity where people reach for easy and paranoid answers on both the right and the left. So the battle should not be over whether there is racism, but how to fight it. And I stand in a tradition that thinks the answer is a politics that prizes human dignity for all, without exceptions, against all the violence of empire and capital, understanding that miserable hatreds and prejudices are born of a broken world, and it is a world we must utterly transform. Now, we're brought here tonight to stand with Jeremy Corbyn. That's the title of our rally. So why? Well, I hear he's a nice man, but that doesn't much interest me. What interests me is where he comes from and what politicized him. He learned his radicalism in Jamaica as a young man. He was caught up in a wave of optimism as Michael Manley's opposition on the island championed workers at home and alliances with third world radicalism abroad. Michael Manley wanted a minimum wage, free education, land reform, a war on illiteracy, and an expanded democratic franchise. He wanted to do all these things in office, and he insisted that doing them required removing Jamaica from the suffocating orbit of the American state. Energized by Manley and Jamaica, a young Corbyn then traveled across South America. In Chile, he stood with thousands of others at a huge May Day demonstration, Come Allende rally, the great democratic leader overthrown in a US-backed coup. And in his final speech of the 2019 election, Corbyn summoned the memory of a Chilean musician, surely unknown to most of his young British audience, Victor Jara. Corbyn told the crowd how he sung of revolution until Pinochet's men rounded him up and smashed his hands and his guitar before they killed him. And Corbyn quoted Victor Jara, "My guitar is not for the rich. No, nothing like that. My song is of the ladder we are building to reach the stars." That was the world that produced Jeremy Corbyn. So many column inches have bemoaned the weirdness of it, or mocked the madness of facing British voters with these arcane commitments to faraway places. But that gets it all wrong. Corbyn's internationalism was born of a recognition of shared interests. The goal was freedom from domination, to empower people everywhere to live standing up and not to be humiliated on their knees. The loony left that was loathed in the tabloid press of 1980s Britain was hated as much for championing gay liberation and black power and women's liberation as working class emancipation and working class power and socialism. And so this is why we care about Palestine. We care just as people all over the world were once inspired by the courage and the fortitude of the people of Vietnam, who, with limited means, confronted might and power and demanded freedom and independence. It is what the people of South Africa did too through long years of prison and violence. And today, against a network of checkpoints and blockades, in the last active site of settler colonial violence in the world, the people of Palestine continue to prize freedom. And so they speak to a current that runs through our blood too, the demand that human beings should be able to live in dignity. These are the dreams that briefly occupied the mainstream of British life while Jeremy Corbyn led the Labour Party. But these dreams have always been there, far from the attention of journalists and commentators. They are the dreams of Saklat Vala and CLR James, of Stuart Hall and Shivanandan, and every unknown and unnamed militant who shouted, "Black and white, unite and fight," and faced down the miseries of division and hatred in the quest for a better world. We need to reinvent those traditions now for a thoroughly different world, but we need them still and urgently. The ice caps are melting and the seas are rising and the forests are burning and the walls are growing higher. And it has never been more true that either we all win or some of us will burn and others will drown. So wear the badge of anti-imperialism and anti-capitalism and call them the badges of dignity and freedom and survival against a capitalist society that would burn down the world. Fight racism. Fight anti-Semitism, including on the left. And please remember the words of the Hebrew Bible. Justice, justice shall we pursue. Thanks so much.
Barnaby, thank you so much. That was utterly inspiring. I think exactly what we all needed to hear this evening. So really grateful for that. Thank you. So now we're going to hand over to another fantastic speaker. We've got Roger Mckenzie, who's the Assistant General Secretary for Union. Welcome, Roger.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I'm speaking in a personal capacity this evening, not speaking on behalf of anyone else, but I am proud to be here to stand up for my friend and comrade Jeremy Corbyn in the same way as we've stood on picket lines together, that we've stood on anti-racist demonstrations together, as we've stood together as friends and comrades for more than 30 years. I never do anything other than stand by my friends. I want to start off my contribution by paying sending solidarity greetings to all of those people in Turkey and Greece who have suffered from the earthquake today, because that's something that Jeremy would do if he was here tonight. Because as a staunch internationalist, he'd always send his solidarity. And I think as people on the left, that's what we should do tonight. I also want to send my solidarity, of course, not just to Jeremy, but also to his family, who besieged in their homes by journalists out for blood. And I think that we have to remember the human side of this and just remember that our comrade and his family are in need of our support and in need of our solidarity tonight. I'm really proud, as always, to stand up and beside my comrade, Jeremy, because that's what Jeremy has done for me all of my life. He's been somebody who doesn't wear his anti-racist badge as something like a fashion that he can put on and take off at will. What he's done is he's always been an anti-racist, always been somebody you could rely on to stand up against all forms of racism wherever it takes place. And I remember the stories of Jeremy standing next to the legendary Bernie Grant in Haringey as the fascists came through that place, as the fascists came through the centre of Haringey in Wood Green. People organised against those fascists. People organised against racism. And Jeremy didn't do that just because it was a good thing to do, or certainly not a safe thing to do. He did it because he believed in it. He did it because it was the right thing to do. He was right to be able to stand up. He was right to be able to say, they will not pass us in Wood Green, in the same way as I believe his mother said that in Cable Street all those years ago. So Jeremy was a staunch ally against racism in the Labour Party to those of us who were part of the Black Sections movement way before any trade union supported us, way before any other member of Parliament supported us. Jeremy was there. Jeremy supported us. Jeremy stood up against racism when we were just saying things like, it is wrong for the Labour Party to take the black vote for granted. It is wrong of the Labour Party not to listen to the concerns of the black community, not to listen to the concerns of black members, and certainly at that time, not to have any black representation in the House of Commons. And Jeremy stood up, not because it was easy, not because it was convenient, but because he believed in what we were saying. And he didn't try and speak on our behalf. What he did was he stood next to us as if on a picket line, because when you stand together, you are strong. And that's what Jeremy has always understood. So actively fighting against anti-Semitism is absolutely a duty of everybody within the Labour Party, as it is to stand up against the anti-black racism that many of us still experience in the Labour Party, but also still experience across society. If we really want to say that we are committed to anti-racism, and if we really want to say that we're committed to fighting against anti-Semitism, then that must be a reality. It can't just be something that we talk about in speeches. It can't be something that we don't bring into our lives every single day. So I think we are missing an enormous opportunity here, an enormous opportunity, because we've been diverted away from talking about how we can really implement the EHSRC report, how we can really implement that report, how we can build a movement that's going to make a difference to working class people, how we can build a movement against racism in this country with the Labour Party, with the trade union movement at its heart. That's what we must do. And instead, while we've diverted ourselves internally within the Labour Party, the Tories are putting public service workers in harm's way and are intent on making public service workers pay for their mishandling of the pandemic. So what I hope that we can do is build that movement for real change, for a real fight against anti-Semitism, for a real fight against anti-Black racism, but also build that fight to stand up for public services in this country, to stand up against these Tories. We will not do that if we are facing each other and fighting each other. The only way we can stand up against these Tories is when we stand united in solidarity. You don't beat anti-Semitism, you don't beat racism by more anti-Semitism or more racism. You beat those things with solidarity. You certainly don't beat them when you're divided against each other. That takes us nowhere. So my plea is for the suspension against Jeremy to be lifted so that we can concentrate on the real issues that face us, the real big issues that face us. Anti-Semitism is a massive issue for us. Racism is a massive issue for us. And we have to galvanise ourselves together so that we can stand up and say, these Tories who are trying to divide working class people against each other, they will not win. They will not win because we will not let them win, because we're organised enough, we're strong enough, and all of the talents, all of the people, whether Jewish, Black, men, women, gay, transgendered, all of us stand together against these Tories so that we can build that society that's going to make a difference for all of us. Solidarity to Jeremy, solidarity to Jeremy's family, and solidarity to all of you too. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Roger. It's been really great to hear from you this evening. So now I'm going to hand over to our very own Deborah Hermanns, who is London Regional Rep on Momentum's NCG. Thanks very much for joining us, Debs.
It's amazing to see so many people at this rally this evening. It's been an extremely difficult few days, not least for left-wing Jews like myself. The EHSC report has shown that time and time again, Jewish Labour members were failed by the party's disciplinary procedures. No wing of the Labour Party comes out of this report with clean hands. Failings were made across the board, and it is right that Jeremy Corbyn accepted the recommendations of the report. But rather than taking the opportunity to unite the party behind a plan to improve its processes and to make sure it is a welcome space for all communities, Keir Starmer has used this moment to push his own factional agenda. The decision to suspend Jeremy Corbyn is the most reckless and divisive move it was possible for the Labour leadership to make. This is a far cry from Keir Starmer's pledge to unite the party and end factionalism. But it follows a worrying trend of Starmer distancing himself from the progressive politics he put front and centre of his leadership campaign earlier this year. In recent months, we have seen Starmer fail to oppose a spy cops bill that would allow agents of the state to rape, torture and kill with impunity, fail to oppose the Overseas Operation Bill that would allow British soldiers to get away with war crimes, fail to impose income requirements for migrants, fail to support the right of EU citizens to stay in the UK. But we have seen Starmer sack most of the left-wing MPs from his front bench for voting against authoritarian Tory legislation and threaten to deselect MPs who don't vote the way he demands. How many of those who voted for Keir Starmer thought they were voting for this? Starmer has shown himself to be tough on the left of this party and incredibly weak on our vicious right-wing government. He seems to think this is an effective electoral strategy. But this strategy will tear the Labour Party apart. Starmer's actions cannot be seen in isolation from the unprecedented attacks against the left that we've seen over the last 5 years, a non-stop barrage of lies, smears and abuse. More often than not, this has taken the form of attacks on Jeremy Corbyn directly. Jeremy will be the first to admit he made mistakes as leader. I'm sure we all have regrets and have learned lessons from our experiences over the last 5 years. But we all know that a lot of these attacks were never about Jeremy as an individual. They were attacks on the ideas he represented, and we have a responsibility to fight for those ideas in the weeks, months, and years ahead. Firstly, it is crucial that we demand Jeremy's immediate reinstatement to the party. You can sign the petition and bring motions to your CLP. I would also encourage you to get out there and speak to others you know and ask them to raise their voices with us. Whether they're Starmer voters or members of your union or part of a campaign in your community, the breadth of our coalition will be one of our greatest strengths in overcoming this injustice. But the best way we can fight back against the leadership's factional attacks is to build a strong and organised socialist movement. Momentum will stand up to the leadership when it takes the wrong path, but all our power comes from our collective organisation. And that means we need left members to be united into one organisation. Momentum should be the home for socialists across this country, a place to meet like-minded people, debate, strategise and organise. So what's our plan? In the short term, we need to send the leadership a message by electing a grassroots NEC. When they attack party democracy or distance themselves from Keir's pledges to members, they need to see that members fight back. In the medium term, we need to build our base, be that through connecting to working class communities through initiatives like our eviction resistance campaign, or creating the next generation of socialists in local government through our Future Councillors programme. We need to scale up political education, creating vibrant discussion and strategic thinking in our movement. And we need thriving, democratic and campaigning momentum groups up and down the country. And in the long term, we need to build a movement that can shift the ground beneath the feet of the right. The Labour Party must lead the way in overcoming the problems of the 21st century, from climate change to a rising far right, and we must shape the future of our party to that end. And of course, right now, the priority for everyone in the party must be to improve the way Labour tackles anti-Semitism and to make Jewish members feel welcome. But this anti-democratic suspension only damages that goal and is an attack on the left at a time when socialist solutions are needed more than ever. Comrades, stay in Labour, stay in Momentum, join Momentum, get active in your local group and go out there to fight racism and fight for socialism.
Absolutely. Thank you, Deb. Spot on. Really great to hear from you. So now we've got another fantastic young speaker. We're going to hear from Jess Barnard, a brilliant young activist who's currently standing to be chair of Young Labour as part of the Socialist Future slate. Thanks a lot for joining us, Jess.
Thanks so much for the introduction, and thank you to everyone at Momentum for organising and working around the clock to pull together the left at such an overwhelming and challenging time for us. I want to start by echoing the comments already made by those previously on the call that we as the left must be completely committed to tackling anti-Semitism and racism. My unconditional solidarity with Jewish members who've been let down by the party, and I hope that everyone on this call accepts the ECHR recommendations. The left must always take a stand against anti-Semitism, and we must do much more to address anti-Semitism, rooting it out of our own factions, our own party, and of course, society. And now I want to address the Labour crisis caused by the suspension of lifelong anti-racist, anti-imperialist campaigner Jeremy Corbyn. While the Labour Party are wrongly suspending principled people like Jeremy, the discussion we needed about building a movement against racism has been overshadowed, and the Tories are getting away with starving children in our society. As members, we have every right to be angry at the suspension of Jeremy and the treatment of the left as a whole over the past few months. I'm furious that dear friends of mine, like many of you on this call who campaign tirelessly for a Labour government for a better world, feel that the Labour Party no longer upholds the values that are integral to each and every one of us: fairness, equality and justice. And so the leadership of the Labour left need to take action, and they need to acknowledge the betrayal that is currently felt by the membership. The membership are the beating heart of the Labour Party. And so tonight I won't be telling you to be calm or measured in your response to a situation that is miles away from calm or measured about a project that we are so passionate about and that so many people need. But I will implore you not to walk away and instead redouble your efforts, reaffirm your solidarity and your struggle for a better world. The Labour left divided without solidarity will not win. Only with our collective strength will we survive these attacks. And we must show our solidarity not only through demanding Jeremy Corbyn is reinstated, but with each other, with Jewish members in the party, and with everyone in the party who needs a transformative Labour government. The right of the party is banking on us being divided. So let's show them the true strength of our solidarity. If history has shown us anything, it's that there is no simple route to power that is going to land on the laps of the left. So we need to work together more than ever. Our project for a fair society is only as strong as the determination of our members to achieve it. And every single socialist here tonight will be a building block in the path to achieving this change. To any young members on the call, I'm sure you overwhelmingly felt inspired by the vision of Jeremy Corbyn. To acknowledge the struggles that we face, and for the first time in our lifetime, provided a real solution and hope that it didn't have to always be this way. To any young members feeling dismayed or powerless, I want to tell you that you are valued, you are our movement, and if elected as Young Labour Chair, I will do everything in my power to ensure that the youth wing of our party makes sure that no young members are made to feel isolated, powerless, or taken for granted, but we need you with us. So what can we, everyday members of the Labour Party, do at a time when we feel hopeless and powerless, and where do we put this anger that we feel? Firstly, if leadership doesn't arrive from left figures, we must build it. And that's why I'm urging everyone on this call to join Momentum or rejoin Momentum. Build up your local branch. Start building an organised, politically educated and motivated left that is serious about power and focused on collectivism. We need to develop future leaders of the socialist movement. We must resist the suspension of Jeremy Corbyn, but we need to support the next generation of left-wing candidates to help grow our movement. And if you're a Young Labour member, this means voting for a socialist future slate in the current Young Labour elections. We need to scale up political education and provide a home for socialists to exchange ideas, develop transformative policy, and most importantly, find consensus to work together. We need to select socialists across the party, and we need to put ourselves forward for these positions, because it's never been more essential that we pass socialist policies, have socialists in position to make change in their communities, from community action of keeping children fed in their areas to making sure we pass policies on Labour Council that transform whole areas. We need to support social and economic struggle in our communities. So that means joining a trade union and a renters union, organising inside and outside your workplace to fight back against bad bosses and exploitative landlords. It feels like a hopeless time, but it isn't. We aren't where we were 5 years ago, but we need to make sure we work together as the left to push for our vision for a fairer society. There are no quick fixes, but our only chance is organising together. That's what Jeremy Corbyn will be doing, and it's what every single one of us needs to do now. Solidarity, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was really great to hear from you. So now we're going to hand over to Richard Burgon, MP for Leeds East, one of the most principled voices in Parliament. Thanks so much for joining us this evening, Richard.
Thank you very much. And firstly, I want to say a big thank you to the new Momentum leadership for organising this event tonight. For decades, Jeremy Corbyn has always stood in solidarity with oppressed people at home and abroad. A voice for the voiceless. Someone who's always gone that extra mile in the fight for justice and equality. Jeremy Corbyn has always stood with us. Now, more than ever, we need to stand with him. So, to those thinking of quitting Labour, I say, don't leave. Organise. Let's win this. Yesterday should have been an opportunity to move the party on with clarity on how it will respond to anti-Semitism cases in the future. Instead, we are in the middle of a potentially historic division in the party. I want to make a point about the many areas of agreement in Jeremy's statement yesterday with what Keir said too. If you didn't read Jeremy's statement in full, then that may be a surprise to you. The media hasn't exactly been helpful in giving a proper impression of what Jeremy said. You may not, for example, have known that Jeremy said, and I wholeheartedly agree with him, that anti-Semitism is absolutely abhorrent, wrong, and responsible for some of humanity's greatest crimes. And that as leader, he was always determined to eliminate all forms of racism and root out the cancer of anti-Semitism. Or that Jeremy said, anyone claiming there is no anti-Semitism in the Labour Party is wrong, and that one anti-Semite is one too many in our party. Or Jeremy concluding his statement by saying that the EHRC report recommendations be swiftly implemented to help move on from this period. These are important points and form the overwhelming focus of Jeremy's statement. Instead of being a moment to move forward as a party on how to defeat the evil of anti-Semitism, there's talk today of a civil war in the Labour Party. Let me be absolutely clear. That serves no one but the Tory government. Our communities are being hit by the greatest health crisis in generations and the deepest economic fallout in decades. My area is going into Tier 3 on Monday, and many people working in the businesses forced to close are going to be expected to live off just 2/3 of the minimum wage. So the priority for the whole Labour movement must be to force the government to change track and to fight the racism and scapegoating of Black and Jewish communities that I fear will soar across society as the economic crisis deepens. So I truly hope that there can be a united way forward, and I think that all sides can reach one. But I also need to be clear on this point. People are not going to stand idly by while the former leader of the Labour Party is expelled. Some are, no doubt, encouraging Keir to have a Kinnock moment where he deals with the left. While for those offering that advice, I have some news for you. Kinnock lost twice. That's what today's Daily Telegraph editorial calls for. They want a house cleaning and for Keir to define himself by taking on the far left. And they end with this quote, "It is time to drive Corbynism out of the Labour Party altogether." So that's hundreds of thousands of members, especially younger members and trade unionists, driven out of the party. If that approach is taken, then don't be surprised if many other members respond by withdrawing their time, their money, and their resources. Keir stood on a pledge of unity, and I want to make an appeal to that pledge. Unity doesn't mean that we all agree, or even that we refrain from robust debate, and I've been calling for Labour's front bench to go much further on its response to COVID. As Secretary of the Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs, I don't expect to agree with progress, and they will no doubt desperately hope not to agree with me. But unity means that the Labour Party remains a party of Social Democrats, Socialists and trade unions. This attack on Jeremy will be rightly interpreted as an attempt to drive Socialists out of the party. That would weaken the movement as a whole. Some may look at today's polls and see Keir a little ahead of Boris and think now is the time to kick out the left. But Boris Johnson won't be the Tory leader going into the next general election. The Tories will be ruthless and they'll have a fresh face ready by then. It will be an uphill fight for Keir to become Prime Minister, which is what I want to see. I want to see Keir as Prime Minister. I want to see that Labour government for the good of my community and the good of all communities. And Keir shouldn't have that fight with one hand tied behind his back. So the way forward is clear. We admit, Jeremy, unite to take the fight to the Tories.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Richard. It's been really great to hear from you this evening. So now we're going to welcome Rikva Brown, who's the editor of Vashti, a new Jewish media platform. She's also a formidable grassroots campaigner. We're really lucky to have her here today. Thanks, Rikva.
Thanks, Sonali. It's Rivka, but that's okay. It's a difficult name. So yeah, thank you so much for having me here. I also note that Deborah and I are wearing the same jumper in different colours, so top points to both of us. I'm going to be brief because it's Shabbat and I'm about to go and have a lovely meal. But I wanted to be here because I think it's really important to focus. And this was clarified to me by some words that a comrade and friend shared with me today from a 1942 book called Anti-Semitism and the Jewish Question by the Austrian Jewish Marxist scholar I. Renab. And he writes in his book that throughout the ages, anti-Semitism and the Jewish question have been used as a diversionist weapon against the progressive forces in their struggle for a better and higher order of things. And today, they can still be used for the same purpose. I mean, this is entirely relevant to our moment, right? We've just had a day when, and years when anti-Semitism and the Jewish question, as we might call it, have been used to distract us from what ought to be the focus of the Labour Party, which is, of course, winning power, but also creating kind of transformative social change. And we've been, really dragged into the weeds of an important, but also very, thorny and kind of painful problem. And I think that today, of all days, it's really important that we keep our eyes on the prize, really. And in a sort of strange way, I think that Corbyn's suspension, unjust and outrageous as it is, does help us to do that. And it reminds us that, the EHRC report, helpful and important as it was, its findings and its recommendations are not going to be what stamp out anti-Semitism in the Labour Party or in our society. Changing a disciplinary process, clarifying, that process or preventing lotto interference in it are not going to render Labour the kind of perfectly anti-racist party that it aspires to be. That kind of change can only come from a kind of social transformation, from class and interracial solidarity of the kind that, obviously, as has been mentioned before today, Jeremy Corbyn has been trying to cultivate all of his life. And so really, this isn't about this, drastic act that Keir Starmer took yesterday has reminded us that actually, we perhaps, while we should be enacting the recommendations of the report, of course we should also really be focusing on what's going to kind of rid us of anti-Semitism and of racism in our party and our society, and not getting kind of overly dragged into kind of procedural and bureaucratic solutions that might seem kind of simple and appealing, but actually are like short-term and ineffective. And so I'm quite excited actually at the prospect that this could be a very clarifying moment for a lot of Labour members and mobilising force to re-engage with the grassroots of the party and outside the party. As people have mentioned today, we've got trade unions, we've got all sorts of kind of social justice movements. And that's the thing that I hope that people are going to kind of reinvigorate as a result of this, rather than kind of having it out over kind of procedural issues, which are important, but should never be and should never have been our priority. So yeah, I think, as Roger was saying earlier, I think it's kind of time to concentrate on the real big issues that are facing us, not least because we know now more than ever what those issues are, right? We've got child poverty, we've got an epidemic of homelessness and of unemployment, we've got a creeping privatization in our health service. These are the issues that, wealth inequality and kind of an endemic racism in our society that, as Barnaby was saying, is directed towards minorities of all kinds, including Jews. And those are the social issues whose resolution will necessarily expedite the kind of healing of the wounds in the party over anti-Semitism. And so I think that, you know, ultimately, whilst I kind of immensely admire the work that people do within the parliamentary party and within CLPs to sort of address anti-Semitism and to kind of fight those kind of bureaucratic and important fights, I just want to remind everyone that ultimately our focus, as kind of Renap says in his book, ought to be on the higher order of things. What is the world we want to create? What's the world we want to live in? Because anti-Semitism isn't an isolated issue, and you know, it's connected to all of the social inequalities that exist in our society, and that's the exciting opportunity that this kind of clarifying, although deeply hurtful, moment has created. Which is that we need to kind of get back in touch with those things and not preoccupy ourselves with a kind of procedural or kind of internecine solutions, I suppose. So sorry, that's not a particularly inspiring note on which to end, but thank you so much for having me, and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much, Vivka. I'm so sorry for getting your name wrong.
No, you're right.
Apologies for joining us. It's been really great to hear from you. Now we're going to hand over to Paul Holmes, who's a Unison activist. Thanks for joining us this evening, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Paul Holmes. I'm a candidate in the current Unison General Secretary election. And what's facing this country at this moment in time, despite what the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph think, is ordinary working people have got two things facing them: the livelihood or the life. That's what's being put to them at this moment in time. Are they going to have a job? Are they going to have pay? Or are they going to die? Or are the relatives going to die under COVID? And that's the thing that's in front of ordinary working people. And I joined this party the day after Thatcher got elected in 1979. Never been in a political party. My mother said to me, "Why are you joining a party for? People like you don't join political parties." And I said, "Well, what happened? Well, you grew up, Mother." She said, "Well, on our street, which was a row of terrace tied housing," she said, "everybody voted Labour. Everybody knew the red flag, but nobody joined the party. That were for people better than us." And I said, "Well, I think it's time that them people who should have joined the party do." And I did. And I've watched the Labour Party over the 41 years. And what's interesting about it, and I firmly believe this, I said it from day one to today, the majority of people in the Labour Party are socialists. They believe in free education, they believe in free health, they believe in free electricity. But they're not sure whether it can be achieved or not. And what Jeremy Corbyn did was give people hope. People believed that these things that they wanted, that they fought for, that they campaigned for, could be achieved. And, you know, we were all felt the same on the morning of the 2019 general election. We'd all been optimistic, particularly following the 2017 election. We all felt devastated at the result. But going into that election, those who rule this country were horrified. They were faced with Johnson, who they didn't want, and Corbyn, who they didn't want even more. And that is the basic agenda in this country at this moment in time. And people like me joined the Labour Party after Jeremy got elected. It's a mute argument whether Jeremy created the movement or the movement created Jeremy. It came at a moment in time. And it's the only time in my 41 years in the Labour Party to the 2017 general election when people put the manifesto in the air at a meeting, everybody at the meeting cheered for a manifesto, for a book. Half of people didn't know what were in the manifesto in other general elections. And that's because the manifesto contained things that would have improved people's lives. And, you know, there's been a lot of talk tonight, and I agree with it, about internationalism. But I think you've always got to call the truth the truth. Those who own this country are internationalists. They think about nothing else but international trade and international profit and international ripping off. And we have always been internationalists. The last dispute strike I was involved in 2 years ago in my branch in Huddersfield was about the bin workers, 25% of whom were Afro-Caribbean, who suffered a deluge of racism and bullying that you wouldn't believe, words I hadn't heard for 30 years, from managers paid very high salaries in a Labour council who said, this is the only way you can get these people to work. And them things, after we cross them things, by united and collective action. That's what we did. The turning point in the bin strike in Kirklees was when the white bin workers said, we're not having this. We've heard it and we're not having it. And that lifted the black workers as well. Because suddenly they thought, I'm fed up with being bullied, but actually there's a united response coming here. Well, that's what Jeremy Corbyn did for us. I went to Featherstone, a meeting organised by John Trickett, which is a small mining village outside of Wakefield. All white, would be population 14,000. And they booked a meeting in the rugby league club there, probably holds 300 or 400, sorry. The meeting had to be moved out into the main stand of the ground because 1,000 people turned up. Half the people at the meeting had walked to it. I've never seen anything like that, except when Scargill spoke at meetings in the miners' strike. And that's the hope that Jeremy Corbyn created. And the problem was that they condemned him after the 2019 election, but the vote in the 2019 election was bigger than in 2005 or 2010 or 2015. Wasn't a disaster. It was disappointing, but it wasn't a disaster that people told us it would be. And one of the problems was because of there's two words that go together hand in hand, democracy and socialism. You can't have one without the other. It's impossible. And what happened was that between 1997 and 2015, you couldn't get to be a Labour MP if you were decent. So when Jeremy Corbyn resigned after the last general election, the two candidates for the leadership, you vote for who you want, it's democracy, I'm not bothered by that, had only been MPs since 2015. They'd only been MPs for 4 or 5 years. And that's what we were faced with because democracy had been removed, and without democracy, you can't have socialism. I don't care if somebody disagrees with me. I don't care if I'm wrong and they're right, or vice versa. If they honestly believe what they believe, that's debate. I've learned more from debate than I've ever learned from lectures. And that's what the party should be about. It should be a thriving democracy. Nobody would have thought in 2015, after the resignation of the previous leader, that who would inspire the young people of this country would a 68-year-old Labour MP who'd been sat on the back bench the whole of his life. But he personified the things that they wanted, the things that their parents and grandparents had that had been taken off them. And that's how we found ourselves in this situation. It's not about individuals. The problem with the Labour Party is there's 500,000 people in it. That's the problem as far as those who rule this country are concerned. And Tony Blair said, if we're going to reclaim the Labour Party, we've got to get rid of 300,000 people. And that's what they believe as well, the people who run this country. It's not the fact that what Jeremy Corbyn's politics are, it's that he reflects the politics of the majority of members of the Labour Party. The majority of people in the Labour Party love the 2017 manifesto and the 2019. The Tories can't stand that. They don't want life to change. They want it to be like it was after 2008 and how they want it to be after COVID. And we've got to stand shoulder with shoulder with Jeremy Corbyn. We have no option for our own futures. It's terrible what's happening to him and his family. He's been through more. I never thought I'd ever say this, but he's been through more than Arthur Scargill went through. And he's shown courage and fortitude. He's been wrong on one or two things. We should have had mandatory selection. That's just another form of democracy. But being wrong is not a crime. What a crime is doing something you don't believe in because somebody is threatening you or paying you to do that. And we need to say to Jeremy Corbyn, we stand straight next to you, 100%, all 300, 400, 500,000 of us. If you resign from the Labour Party at this moment in time, you're deciding that you're going to become an armchair socialist. You're deciding you're going to comment on events rather than take part in them. The fascists weren't driven off the street in Cable Street by people sat at home conducting an opinion poll or writing letters. People got on the street and drove them off. And that's why I encourage people to join the Labour Party. It's not called a struggle for nothing. It is a struggle, but it's the most rewarding struggle. It's not a spectator sport. I don't go to meetings on a Friday night because I like going to meetings on a Friday night. I do it because I want to live in a better life. And people will support people who want to create a better life for them. And that's the glimpse that Jeremy Corbyn gave us. We owe him what he gave to us. We need to give back to him twofold. But we also need to say to people, this battle in the Labour Party is a battle about ideas. It's a battle about the Labour Party changing people's lives. So when we come out of COVID, those who, Oscar Wilde said when he come to this country, the first thing I knew about England was everybody was paid in inverse proportion to the usefulness. We need to change that. Jobs that are low paid and not low worth. When we come out of this, we need to have a full party with proper socialist policies that improve people's lives. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. So now we're going to hand over to none other than Diane Abbott, absolute hero, inspirational MP for Hackney North and Stoke Newington. We're so lucky to have you here this evening. It's great to see you, Diane. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Thank you for inviting me to speak this evening. And more than anything else, my message is that I stand with Jeremy. And it is vital that he is reinstated. But let me begin by saying that racism, including anti-Semitism, continues to be a problem in society and in our Labour Party. There have been historic failures in the way that racism, including anti-Semitism, has been handled by the party. And the priority right now for everyone in our party is to come together and successfully improve the way that Labour handles racism and anti-Semitism. And of course, I want to see all the recommendations in the EHRC report implemented, as does Jeremy. But, you know, I was shocked and saddened when Jeremy was suspended from the Labour Party yesterday. And one of the reasons it's shocking and saddening is that few people have given as much to the Labour movement as Jeremy Corbyn. He joined as a teenager, has been a dedicated grassroots activist. His work as a constituency organiser in Hornsey in North London laid the basis for Hornsey now being one of the safest seats in London. He was a councillor for many years. His day job was as a NUPE organiser, working for and alongside the low paid. He was a member of Parliament for nearly 40 years. And of course, he's been an inspirational leader of our party. And he did none of these things for the greater glory of Jeremy, but because of his incredible commitment to the Labour movement. That's why it's so important that his suspension is lifted. But you know, this is not just an issue about one man, even if that man is my great ally and the former leader of our party, Jeremy Corbyn. This is about all of us. It's about the future of the left. It's about the future of the Labour Party, and it's the future of millions of people. The overwhelming majority of people in this country, the people that rely on us for a better tomorrow. Now, the future for ordinary working people is looking bleaker every day. This Tory government is presiding over the worst public health crisis for a century. That's why I'm campaigning, and the Socialist Campaign Group of MPs is campaigning for a zero COVID strategy to bring down the level of infection as low as possible. And as well as one of the biggest death tolls in Europe, this government, Boris Johnson's government, has also presided over one of the worst slumps among major industrialized economies. There will be a huge number of job losses which have already begun. So it's never been more important that we have a Labour government. Amongst the issues around COVID and unemployment, we're looking at a Tory government that has handed over £12 billion to its private sector friends for a completely failed testing and tracking system. But that same government refuses to part with a fraction of that money to pay for school meals for poor children in the school holidays. It is shameful. And so to address these issues and many more, We need to fight and campaign against this government, and we need a Labour government. We need to campaign against the terrible policies of this government. But in the end, it's about state power. And I take the issue of power very seriously, because it's only through a Labour government that we can implement an alternative. And that's the other reason why the decision to suspend Jeremy is so deeply damaging. It is, of course, awful for him, who's given his life to the movement. It's awful for his family, his friends and allies. And it's very worrying for the entire left. But it is most damaging to the prospect of a Labour government. There's a truism in British politics that divided parties don't win elections, and divisions like we're seeing now will not help us win the next election. They may win a few positive headlines from the mainstream media, but it's still the mainstream and Tory media, and they will attack us at every opportunity. They only ever applaud us when we're attacking each other, and we should not give them the satisfaction. So I'm completely opposed to the suspension of Jeremy Corbyn. I stand with Jeremy, not just because he's a very good man and a long-time ally and friend, or even because of the threat his suspension poses to the entire left. I'm opposed to his suspension, to what is at stake for the Labour Party and the millions of our supporters. We must come together. We must campaign against this suspension. We must fight against this suspension because of what is at stake for all of us. Jeremy has always stood by the people. And at this time of crisis, we must stand with Jeremy. I stand with Jeremy, and I hope that this whole audience does. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Diane. I'm sure everyone here would absolutely agree with you on that. It's been really great to hear from you this evening, and we stand with you as well, Diane, every time. So thank you this evening to all of our brilliant speakers, and thank you to everyone that's joined us. It's been really great to hear from everyone this evening. As all our speakers have pointed out, we have so much to do. The future of our movement rests on the work of activists like us. If you're not a member of Momentum and you want to build a movement that can shape the future of our party, we need you to join today. Unity is even more important when we're under attack, as every trade unionist knows. Once you've joined, get stuck into the fight back by joining our eviction resistance campaign and taking on the big landlords, building your local group and making plans for the future, and voting for the grassroots voice slate in the NEC elections and the socialist future slate in the Young Labour ones. The Labour Party isn't the leader or the General Secretary or the staff, it's us, and we can decide what happens next. So thank you everyone for joining us. If you hadn't had enough incisive discussion of the challenges ahead, switch over now to Novara Media on YouTube for another brilliant edition of Tisky Sour, starting now. Good evening.